listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
We get to continue our Set Apart to Serve series today. Looking forward to talking with a seminarian today and learning about that journey to seminary. Thanks to Concordia University, Wisconsin for supporting The Coffee Hour. You can find out more about Concordia University, Wisconsin at cuw.edu.
Live uncommon.
Joining us today, Jim Wiencke. He is a first-year residential alternate route seminarian at Concordia Seminary in St. Louis. That's first-year RAR seminarian. Jim, welcome to The Coffee Hour.
I'm glad to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
We are looking forward to hearing your story, learning more about how the Lord brought you to seminary. Tell us about your experience, what you were doing before you even started thinking about seminary. Where did the Lord have you in life and in vocations?
Well, life started being raised in a Christian Science family. And so we went to church every Sunday, we prayed at dinner, but that was about the extent of it. And it was in my 30s that I came to faith at a non-denominational church. And I moved a little bit, but I kept growing in my faith, learning more about the Bible, and doing more leadership positions within the church. And after about 20 plus years of that, God, through my journey from being a teacher, working in a textile mill with all kinds of people, and I've had the opportunity to interact with people working hourly shifts just to pay their bills, husband and wife. And I've also been in positions where I'm talking to executives at the top of corporations. So I've talked to a huge range of our society. And I was at a spot in life where I was like, God, what are you calling me to do? And he put on my heart the call to go be a pastor. At the same time, I was single. And I actually got to know my wife while I was looking at seminaries. And she happened to be a Lutheran called teacher. And so I had the decision to make that I really liked this person. I felt ready to propose, but I had to make a choice. If I asked her to join my church, she would lose her job. And so I asked her to convince me that the Lutherans follow the Bible. It's funny to say that now, but I didn't know anything about Lutherans. And so I went through the Lutheranism 101 book with her, and I joined the Lutheran church. We got married, and we are 8 years later. But I had already felt the call. But 1 month into our marriage, my wife was pregnant. And God, I learned about the SMP program. And in getting our marriage started without any debt, I didn't have a seminary fund anymore. And at that time, I'm not sure whether the financial aid program at the seminary didn't exist yet, or it just wasn't known about down in Florida where we were. But nobody mentioned it, and I could not afford the SMP. So we had 2 children within the first year, 13 months of our marriage. And our second child has Down syndrome, so we had the NICU stay and everything. And God eased my feeling of the call to be a father instead. And it really was 7 years later that one thing is I had a Lutheran pastor in Perry County, Missouri. He actually helped me break my concerns about Lutheran's definition of communion, which is different from the church that I came to faith in. If God says it, it is, and I am 100% at peace with that. So that's my long call process. After that was resolved, I reached out to the seminary. It helps to have a Lutheran called wife. She knows all the ins and outs. And so I knew where to go look, and I got in touch with the seminary and the people that help you get started. Tom Shund was a tremendous help. And that really was the process. I kind of skipped the consideration decision kind of because I did it earlier in my life. And my wife knew about it before she met me. And so she was kind of excited when I finally got there because she was expecting me to go there. And that's why I wish she was here so you could hear her side of that.
I'm sure she also has stories to tell about this process. Now, you mentioned consideration. That's part of the journey mapping process that we've talked about previously on these set apart to serve conversations with standing partnership. Tell us about your experience with the journey mapping that happened at Concordia Seminary and your conversations about all of these different steps that happen.
Uh, the most interesting thing about it was being with some of my fellow seminarians who came to that and hearing all of our different journeys to get to where we are. It is really amazing that God will find you and you just got to listen to the call, and it can come from any direction, which was fascinating to hear.
You mentioned some of the hurdles that you experienced in that process. You had that awareness and consideration for serving as a pastor, formation and serving as a pastor, but then experienced some hurdles along the way. Uh, were there further hurdles in that process of making the continuing in that process through enrollment and relocation, moving to the St. Louis area to attend seminary? Did you find other challenges through that process?
Well, there's always the challenges because we now have 3 young children. And so when you're getting ready to move and you have 3 young children, it's always a challenge. We were living in Missouri about an hour and a half south in Perry County, and we accepted an opportunity and we came up to visit the campus, and we got to look at the type of place we were going to be living in. We realized we could fit into it. It would be a little smaller than the house where we were living, but it would work. And that was a good chance to get to know really what the seminary was like. But it was a little odd because that happened to be the snow day in 2024. So we didn't get necessarily the normal tour because we didn't want to leave the buildings.
Mm.
But they also were willing to fly in the person I was with to give them a chance to visit, even though they weren't within driving distance. So they really are open to helping you make an informed decision. And so,
What
go ahead.
what other things were you considering or did you need to consider in that transition to seminary?
When you've already felt the call, and I wasn't even aware there were other Concordia seminaries at that time. So I was only looking at St. Louis. My wife was born in St. Louis, raised in St. Louis. Her family is still in St. Louis. So it was a kind of a, if you are going to go, you're going to St. Louis. And so I've been in college 3 different times with my undergraduate and 2 other master's degrees. So I've been through the process enough. So I didn't have hurdles in that way. The hurdles came in trying to learn Greek over the summer. Right.
Oh.
It has its challenges,
Yep.
I'm sure. Okay, you mentioned previous degrees prior to coming to seminary. Tell us a little bit about that education and your undergraduate and 2 master's degrees as well.
I have an undergraduate from Syracuse in operations management. I have an MBA in supply chain and IT from North Carolina State University. And I got a master's in the art of teaching, focused on elementary education at Converse College in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Yeah, I'm not a second career path, which is what most people call. I'm on like the 7th or 8th path to get here.
So tell us about some of those previous careers. Now I'm intrigued.
I know, me too.
That's quite a combination of degrees.
Yeah.
And you're talking with some multi-potentialites who like to study everything.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Oh, wow. To go through the whole story. Let's see. Graduate, go to work for a construction company. I was part of the team that was over the rebuilding of I-95 going from New York to Connecticut.
Wow.
And then I was on Long Island as part of the team rebuilding the Suffolk County Courthouse, part of the management team. But when you join a construction company that does not get any more bids, I was the low man on the totem pole. So 9 months later, I was unemployed. I ended up trying to go to grad school then, but I was told I needed experience in all kinds of facets, which I wouldn't argue with at that stage of life. And so I became a salesperson for a company that offered all kinds of opportunities to gain experience. That was going door to door. That was a fascinating life experience. Um, it led to about a year's worth. The one thing I learned from that is you don't take people. I was down in North Carolina then, up to the winter in New England. They have them go door to door. Having come from Syracuse, it wasn't that big of a shock to me, but the guys from North Carolina, snow was a fascinating concept, and it was cold. So I have that experience. I then went back, got through using temporary services. I got a job in the finance industry. I went from the finance industry to working for General Electric, which is a company that my dad had worked for. And so I wanted to try working there. And the fascinating thing with GE is it was a great experience in the call center. But when I went to interview with a position within, I learned that they were not looking at my resume the years before that I'd been working. They wanted me to gain all that experience within GE. So I wasn't necessarily looking to stay at the lowest pay level for another 5 or 6 years to redo what I've already done. And so it got me to go back to school, and that's when I got my MBA. My MBA led to a job in a textile mill. This is a really big textile company. I interned there and then got a job. I was what they call a supply chain leader, but that was more the scheduler. And so I would schedule people and what they do. A couple of years in, I switched to a production leader mode, which is where I worked with the people working within the plant. I did that for several years. I probably worked with this company about 7 years. And I then was asked by a new plant manager to leave the production role and take a manager position within the staff. It's just a different part of instead of working on the floor with the people, you're in the office and leading them on plant-wide projects. The economy cratered that year, and I did no longer had 30 to 40 people reporting to me. And so I was let go at the end of the year, but God had already got me on the path to go back to school to be a teacher. And so it magically happened at the time. I say magically just because when you reflect, you think it's magical or surprising as you're living it, but you get to see God's handiwork in your life when you're reflective and look back at times. It's like, now I know why that happened, because it enabled me to finish my part-time teaching degree, by going full-time at the time I did it, set up by over a year when I would graduate. Just the way the classes fell within the small school. So I become a teacher. I graduated in December, and I was able to get a job at an alternative middle school. Basically you have to be kicked out of school to become a student in that school. This is in Greenville, South Carolina. And it was a fascinating learning experience. The main thing I learned is that we consider them troubled youths, but they are some of the smartest students you will find. And the majority of the ones I got to know, it was because of dysfunctional families at home that was leading to the dysfunction you would find. They're just people looking to be loved on. And if you don't give them the love, anything can happen. So at the start of the next school year, those schools go back down to a smaller student level. And so I didn't have a job the next year. I happened to time that time as another economy crater. And in the state of South Carolina, they cut funding in education way back. And there just weren't a lot of openings. So here I am, a 6-month graduate, competing for jobs with teachers that had been teaching for 15, 20 years. So I ended up looking up, my parents were relocating from Hawaii to Florida at that time. So I looked at teaching positions in Florida, whereas South Carolina had almost no openings. Florida had tons of them. So that got me to go down to Florida. I got a teaching position after working part-time in a grocery store while I was waiting to get a sub position or a position. I received a long-term sub like a couple months into the school year for a teacher that through a medical condition was out until Christmas. I did that in interacting with the principal before the time Christmas came. She asked me to apply for a granted position, some grant positions that were opening. I ended up getting a position in the elementary school, working with small groups in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades to prepare them for the reading test at the end of the year. So that really is probably a dream position for a lot of really experienced. That was my second experience. But the next year, I was given a 3rd grade position. The principal changed. And it was another fascinating experience. I was given the 3rd grade ESE classroom. That is basically your really struggling students. I did not have a special education degree. I was in so far over my head. I'm here to teach multiplication to the students. They don't even know place value. It's really hard to do multiplication where you don't even have what the ones and tens are, let alone adding and subtracting. So you're not even close to ready for multiplication. I was on my knees at 2:30 in the morning because I couldn't sleep. I was very stressed about how to reach the children, praying to God, I'm in over my head. I need your help. The school day started at 9. I had a meeting at 8 o'clock with some people trying to help me figure out how to teach math. And that we also had a staff meeting at 8:30. Well, my meeting trying to help me with math ran over a little bit, but what I caught when I got to the meeting is they didn't have enough students. It was a 3 to 8 school. They did not have enough students in the middle school. So we had a teacher that was going to have to move to another school. And she said, it is open to the elementary teachers because one of the middle school teachers was qualified also to teach in the elementary. I may be thick-headed at times, but when you're on the praying to God at 2:30 in the morning, and then the door opens, first break I got, I sent in my request to be transferred. I got the position. I was the 9th, 3rd grade in a school that had 8 already. Florida caps the classroom limits at 18 students. So all the classes had 19 or 20, 21. So I gained students from all the different classrooms. I survived the year. There's a book you get as a teacher called The First Days of School, and it tells you about all the things to avoid in your first real true classroom. I probably hit most of the things to avoid, but I survived that. And at the end of the year, when I had my meeting with the principal, they were going back to 8 the next year. I was the only one she didn't hire. So I was once again out of a job. And it was fascinating to me because that was the first year that the state of Florida did their half of your evaluation came from how your students did on the statewide test. Well, I didn't get my final report on how I did until after they had graded all the tests. I actually was a teacher through a lot of prayer and help by God that I did my job. I was a meet expectations, but I didn't have a job. Lots of prayer. I basically spent the next year living at the church I was at, serving, doing anything I could, attending all events as I looked for work. I ended up getting a job with a local machine shop. And it was during this job that I was looking at being called to be a pastor. I was there for over 7 years. I was plugged into a small church and I was put within 1 month over the greeting ministry. And I will tell you that over the next 2 years, it went from like 150 people up to over 750 attending weekly.
Wow.
It was a tremendous experience. So I basically was praying on things. I was voted to become a deacon. And I'm just praying on, what does God want me to do? I was leading Financial Peace University. So I have all these different experiences. And then God moved me out of that church. I'm not going to go into that story, but I went to another local church. So I did not cause a schism. I really felt strongly on that. I had explained to the pastor what was going on, and I wasn't going to raise any fuss. But I realized what happened is God was freeing me from being so plugged in to meet my wife, because I would not have been able to leave that church where I was to become a Lutheran if I was that involved. I did not understand it at the time, but I was looking at seminaries hard.
I want to share more of the story. We need to take a quick break. When we come back from that break, we'll learn more about those next steps and then what brought you to the seminary, how you ended up at seminary studying to become a pastor. You're listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Golseth.
At Concordia University, Wisconsin, we believe you were created for a reason: to use your God-given gifts to help others, to live a life of self-sacrifice in a me-first world, to live a life that's uncommon. Whether you're taking one of 50-plus online programs or learning with us in person on the shores of Lake Michigan, you'll be equipped to make an uncommon impact. Learn more at cuw.edu. Concordia University, Wisconsin. Live uncommon.
Welcome back to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Golseth.
Today we're talking with first-year seminarian Jim Wiencke. He's at Concordia Seminary in St. Louis. Had quite the journey coming to seminary in St. Louis through a variety of education and careers. Do you see, looking back on the variety of education and careers that you had before meeting your wife and before coming to seminary, do you see a common thread or a common element in the various things you got to study and the various ways you got to serve in a variety of careers? Do you see anything common that connects to where you are now?
The biggest connection is, growing up in Hawaii, my parents didn't stress race. I don't see people as colors. They're people. So I had that going for me in the different places I've worked, and I've gotten to deal with the highly educated and the highly uneducated. And I've gotten experience with the professional level and the corporate people and the hourly people. It's basically, I think the best preparation he's given me is I'm prepared to talk with all levels of people at a congregation. I mean, that's the biggest thing. And that, to me, I've seen a lot of people struggle with that.
That's definitely something that comes in handy as a pastor, as a leader of a congregation. Why do you want to be a pastor? Why was this something that you were wanting to do and eventually got to this place to being at the seminary?
You'd have to ask God that question. I'm not somebody, God put on me the call, go be a pastor. And so I can't really answer it in the way you're asking it for that reason.
What's exciting to you about being your first year seminarian? What's exciting to you about being at the place where you've been looking at being for a long time?
The biggest thing is really, it is challenging. It's when you're married and older, my brain, I will acknowledge, is not as subtle and easy to learn all this new information as it might have been when I was in my 20s. But it's also, you don't have the amount of free time as a father of 3 young children as you do when you're single. And so your study hours are a lot more limited. And so it's a little more challenging.
What do you hope to gain? You mentioned that studying Greek was a bit challenging. What do you see in terms of your studies this year? What do you see as challenging this year and looking forward to the coming years of your classes? What do you see as challenging and how do you hope to address those?
Well, the main thing is it's the coordination with my wife, and she has been a tremendous help of helping me gain the time. With things that I used to do, she's picked up some of the responsibilities that I was taking care of in the house to allow me the time to get the studying done and just the support. She's very supportive of me, and I cannot thank her enough for that. That is one of the biggest things. And it's just listen to the professor, do what you're supposed to do. And if you do need help in some things, you have brothers and deaconesses, sisters on the campus taking classes with you. If you need help, they are willing to help you. And there are tools to provide assistance throughout the seminary.
It sounds like you certainly embraced the seminary life, the community that you're experiencing there at seminary and seeing that support in that seminary community. I want to go back just a little bit leading up to your time of considering seminary. Tell us about visiting campus before enrolling. How did that visit to campus make a difference for you?
The main thing was seeing the campus, getting to know the location a little bit. But the main thing was getting to see where we would be living. So I knew I had some feeling I didn't have that stress of, okay, is everything going to fit? What do we have to get rid of? What do we still need? All those different things you think as a father where are you going to move your family to? I was able to get some peace. I mean, the basements out here in the woods are massive. It's like moving and you have twice the garage you were expecting to have. So finding places to put things is not hard. It's a little different when I look at a lot of my classmates because when you're middle-aged and you're married and you and your spouse got married, you have all this stuff when you come together, whereas a lot of the couples are brand new and they're in their low 20s. You don't have anything at that stage. And looking at the basement at the different places, I kind of feel bad when I look and see because we have as much as all our other young people around us.
What are you looking forward to in the next, you've got a little over 2.5-ish more years of your program. What is your hope when you get to the end of that program? What are you excited about doing when you get to be through the program?
Well, it's a little different in the RAR. Okay, so I have a year and a couple of months, and I go on my vicarage. But when I go into my vicarage, I'm probably a sole pastor. I'm probably going to a congregation that doesn't have a pastor. And at the end of the year, the expectation is I will stay the pastor at that church. Mm-hmm. So somewhat my program ends in a year, but I still have coursework that will be going on during my vicarage year. So I'm looking forward to gaining as much knowledge as I can get on the nuts and bolts of Lutheranism and Luther and the Book of Concord and all the different materials that a lot of my classmates, and I know my congregation will have because they've been steeped in it for their entire lives. Whereas I'm coming at it with 8 years of knowledge. So I really am hoping to gain a lot of knowledge on that and all the instruction they can give on being a better pastor, the shape of a sermon, worship planning, sermon planning, and the history are I'm just very blessed that that's what the seminary is teaching me.
So much studying, but all with a great hope of the opportunity to serve and put that to use, serving as a pastor in the future. Our guest today, Jim Wiencke, he's first-year residential alternate route seminarian at Concordia Seminary in St. Louis. Jim, thanks so much for being our guest on the Coffee Hour today.
Thank you very much for inviting me. God bless you.
You can learn more about Set Apart to Serve by visiting lcms.org/SAS. You've been listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
The Coffee Hour with Andy and Sarah is a production of KFUO. To support the Coffee Hour and KFUO Radio, visit KFUO.org. You can also text KFUO to 41444 or send an email to gifts@kfuo.org. And you can call us at 800-844-0524. KFUO. Christ for you, anytime, anywhere.